Jake Morrison stood in the communication room of the space station, staring at the strange blue light coming from the alien device. The message had arrived 3 days ago, and nobody knew what to make of it. The device itself was beautiful, smooth metal that seemed to glow from inside, with symbols that moved across its surface like living things. "Play it again," Jake said to the technician. The voice that came from the device was clear and calm. It spoke perfect English, though there was something odd about the way it formed words. "Greetings to the people of Earth. I am Veltar Quinn, speaking for the Zephyrian Collective. We have watched your species with great interest. We believe it is time for formal contact." Jake had heard this part many times. What came next still made him uncomfortable. "We understand that your species has conflicts over resources. This is natural for growing civilizations. We wish to offer you a solution that has brought peace to our part of the galaxy for thousands of years. We call it Civilized War." Captain Lisa Barnes walked into the room. She was Jake's commanding officer and had been dealing with the political side of this first contact situation. "Any new thoughts on this?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "It still sounds wrong to me. War is war. How can it be civilized?" Lisa sat down and gestured for the technician to continue playing the message. Veltar Quinn's voice filled the room again. "Civilized war is not the brutal destruction your species may know. It is a way to settle disputes with honor, following rules that protect the innocent and limit suffering. Both sides agree to terms before fighting begins. Victory comes through skill and strategy, not through causing the most death." The message went on to explain more details. The Zephyrians showed holographic recordings of their past wars. Jake watched ships that looked like works of art dancing around each other in space. When a ship was damaged, it would signal surrender, and the attacking ship would immediately stop firing. Rescue teams would arrive to help the crew. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to one of the recordings. "When they take prisoners, they treat them like guests. Medical care, good food, comfortable rooms. They even let families visit." Jake watched a recording of ground battles. Soldiers moved with careful precision, avoiding buildings where civilians might be hiding. When the fighting was over, the winning side immediately began helping to rebuild what had been damaged. "It does look better than what we usually do," Jake admitted, "but something feels wrong about it." Dr. Amy Rodriguez entered the room. She was the team's expert on alien behavior and had been studying everything they could learn about Zephyrian culture. "I've been going through their cultural database," she said. "There are things that don't add up." "What kind of things?" Lisa asked. Amy pulled up a display showing various alien species. "They mentioned fighting civilized wars with dozens of different races over the centuries. But look at what happened to those races afterward." The display showed charts and graphs. Jake couldn't understand all of it, but one thing was clear. Every species that fought a civilized war with the Zephyrians eventually became their allies. Not just allies, but devoted followers. "Maybe they just became friends after fighting," Lisa suggested. "Sometimes former enemies become the closest allies." Amy shook her head. "It's more than that. Look at how they describe their relationship with the Zephyrians. They use words like privilege and honor when talking about serving them. They act like being defeated was the best thing that ever happened to them." Jake felt the uncomfortable feeling in his stomach getting stronger. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we might be missing something important about how this civilized war really works," Amy replied. "But Earth's leaders aren't interested in waiting to find out." Lisa nodded grimly. "Admiral Peter Hawkins sent word this morning. Earth accepts the challenge. We're going to fight a civilized war with the Zephyrians over the Kepler 442 system." The Kepler 442 system contained valuable mining planets that both humans and Zephyrians claimed. Under normal circumstances, this might have led to a long and bloody conflict. But the Zephyrians suggested settling it through civilized war instead. "The rules are already being negotiated," Lisa continued. "Equal numbers of ships on both sides. No attacks on civilian targets. No weapons of mass destruction. When a ship signals surrender, the attack stops immediately. Prisoners will be treated well and returned after the war ends." Jake looked at the holographic recording still playing on the screen. The Zephyrian ships were incredibly advanced, but they seemed to be holding back, using less powerful weapons than they probably had. "Why do they want to fight this way?" he asked. "If they're as advanced as they seem, they could probably defeat us easily in a regular war." "That's exactly why this is better," Lisa said. "They're giving us a fair chance. They want to prove that their way of fighting is more honorable than ours." Amy looked worried. or they want something else entirely. The meeting ended with Jake being assigned to join the fleet that would fight this civilized war. As he walked back to his quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a terrible mistake. The Zephyrians seemed polite and honorable, but Amy was right. Something about their history with other species didn't make sense. That night, Jake lay in his bed thinking about the families of soldiers who might die in this civilized war. Even if it was more humane than regular war, people would still die. Ships would still be destroyed. The only difference was that both sides would follow rules and be polite about it. He thought about the recordings of previous Zephyrian wars. The alien soldiers moved with perfect discipline, following complex patterns that seemed more like a dance than a battle. Their weapons were designed to disable rather than destroy, but they were incredibly effective. Every movement seemed calculated for maximum impact with minimum loss of life. But what bothered Jake most was the look on the faces of the defeated aliens in those recordings. They didn't look angry or sad about losing. They looked grateful. They looked like they had learned something important about themselves, something that made them want to serve the Zephyrians forever. Jake pulled up the communication device one more time and listened to Veltar Quinn's message again. The alien's voice was so reasonable, so calm, so sure that this was the right way to handle conflict between civilizations. We look forward to showing humanity the honor and beauty of civilized warfare. The message concluded. Win or lose, both our peoples will benefit from this experience. That was what worried Jake the most. The Zephyrians seemed to think that losing could be a benefit. In his experience, losing a war was never good for anyone except the winners. But somehow the Zephyrians had convinced dozens of other species that defeat was actually a gift. 3 months later, Jake stood on the bridge of the TDF Defender, watching the Zephyrian fleet through the main display. The alien ships were beautiful in a way that human vessels could never be. They curved and flowed like sea creatures, their hulls changing color as they moved through space. They're maintaining exactly 2,000 kilometers distance, reported Commander Ryan Clark, the ship's tactical officer. Just like they promised, Jake nodded. The Zephyrians had been true to their word about everything so far. When the human fleet arrived at Kepler 442, the aliens were waiting in perfect formation. Their commander, Fleet Admiral Nexar Avel, had sent a polite message welcoming the humans to their first civilized war. Incoming transmission from the Zephyrian flagship, announced the communications officer. Put it through, Jake said. The screen filled with the image of Admiral Nexara Vel. The Zephyrian looked almost human, but taller and thinner, with skin that had a slight blue tint. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm confidence that Jake had heard in all Zephyrian communications. Captain Morrison, I hope your crew has settled in well. Tomorrow we begin the first engagement in Sector 7. As agreed, we will use Formation Delta with limited energy weapons only. Understood, Admiral, Jake replied. My ships will be ready. Excellent. I look forward to an honorable battle. May the best fleet win. The transmission ended. Ryan shook his head in amazement. I still can't believe how polite they are. It's like they're inviting us to a formal dinner instead of a war. Over the past 3 months, Jake had experienced several of these civilized battles. They were unlike anything he had ever imagined. Both fleets would meet at a predetermined location and time. They would arrange themselves in agreed-upon formations and begin fighting according to carefully planned rules. The battles were almost like dances. Ships would swoop and dive around each other, firing weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. When a ship took enough damage, its captain would signal surrender, and the attacking ship would immediately stop firing. Rescue teams from both sides would work together to help the damaged vessel and treat any wounded crew members. Jake had been captured twice during these engagements. Both times the Zephyrians had treated him and his crew with incredible courtesy. They were given comfortable quarters, excellent food, and access to entertainment systems. Medical staff checked on them regularly, and they were allowed to communicate with their families back on Earth. It's not what I expected from being a prisoner of war, Lieutenant Kate Sullivan had said during their first capture. She was the ship's chief engineer and had been fascinated by Zephyrian technology. The Zephyrian prison ship was more like a luxury cruise vessel. The human prisoners were given tours of the ship's systems and allowed to ask questions about alien technology. Their guards were friendly and helpful, treating the humans more like honored guests than captured enemies. But something had bothered Jake during that stay. He noticed other prisoners on the ship, aliens from species he didn't recognize. These beings had been captured in previous wars, some of them years ago. What struck him was their attitude toward their Zephyrian captors. "The Zephyrians are amazing," one alien had told Jake. "We were so foolish to fight against them. They showed us how much we had to learn about honor and civilization." "When will you be returned to your people?" Jake had asked. The alien looked confused. "Return? Why would I want to return? The Zephyrians have offered me the chance to stay and learn from them. It's the greatest honor of my life." Jake had met several other long-term prisoners who felt the same way. They spoke about their homeworlds with embarrassment, as if they were ashamed of where they came from. They praised Zephyrian culture, technology, and philosophy with genuine enthusiasm. "They opened our eyes to how primitive we were," another alien explained. "Before we fought them, we thought we were civilized. Now we understand what real civilization looks like." Back on the Defender, Jake thought about those conversations as he prepared for the next day's battle. The war was not going well for humanity. The scoring system was complex, but it was clear that the Zephyrians were winning most of the engagements. It wasn't because they were cheating or breaking the rules. If anything, they followed the rules more carefully than the humans did. Their ships moved with perfect precision, their tactics were flawless, and their crews never made mistakes. They fought like they had been doing this for thousands of years, which they probably had. "Captain," Kate said, entering the bridge with a worried expression, "I've been analyzing the Zephyrian ships we fought against. There's something strange about their weapons and defenses." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. Kate pulled up a technical display. "Look at these energy readings. Their ships are carrying much more powerful weapons than they're using against us, and their defensive systems could probably handle anything in our arsenal." "Maybe they're just being fair," Ryan suggested, "using only weapons that match our level of technology." "That's what I thought at first," Kate said. "But I've been comparing this to recordings of their previous wars. They do the same thing every time. They use exactly enough power to win, but not so much that it seems hopeless for their opponents." Jake studied the data. "You think they're deliberately limiting themselves?" "I think they're fighting exactly hard enough to beat us, but not hard enough to make us give up," Kate replied. "It's like they want the war to last long enough for something else to happen." That evening, Jake received a message from Dr. Amy Rodriguez back on Earth. She had been continuing her research into Zephyrian culture and had made some disturbing discoveries. "Jake, I've been studying the psychological profiles of species that fought civilized wars with the Zephyrians," her message said. "There's a pattern. Every species goes through the same process during and after the war. They start by respecting Zephyrian honor and skill. Then they begin to admire Zephyrian culture. By the end of the war, they're questioning whether they deserve to win against such a superior civilization." Amy's face on the screen looked worried. "I think the civilized war isn't really about winning or losing in the traditional sense. I think it's about something else entirely, but I can't figure out what." Jake turned off the message and looked out at the Zephyrian fleet in the distance. Their ships glowed softly in the darkness of space, beautiful and mysterious. He had to admit that he was beginning to admire them himself. Their discipline, their honor, their advanced technology, it was impressive. But Amy's words stuck in his mind. Every species that fought a civilized war with the Zephyrians ended up admiring them. Every species eventually decided that the Zephyrians were superior, and every species seemed grateful for the chance to serve them afterward. Jake walked to his quarters and tried to sleep, but his mind kept working. The Zephyrians were winning the war fairly, according to all the rules they had agreed upon. They were polite, honorable, and kind to their prisoners. They seemed to genuinely want what was best for everyone involved. So why did Jake feel like humanity was walking into a trap? 6 months into the civilized war, Jake had been promoted to captain of the TDF Resilient after the previous commander was captured in an honorable defeat. The promotion should have made him proud, but instead it reminded him how badly the war was going for humanity. The Zephyrians were winning according to every measure that mattered. They had captured more ships, controlled more territory, and achieved more strategic objectives. But they had done it all while following every rule, treating prisoners well, and maintaining perfect courtesy toward their human opponents. Jake stood in his new captain's quarters, reading reports from the latest battles. Each report told the same story. Skilled Zephyrian forces defeating human ships through superior tactics and technology, then immediately offering medical aid and comfortable detention to the survivors. "Captain, you have a visitor," announced his communications officer. Dr. Ben Carter entered the room. He was a military psychologist who had been assigned to study the effects of civilized warfare on human morale. His face looked troubled. "Ben, what brings you to my ship?" Jake asked. "I've been interviewing prisoners who have been returned from Zephyrian custody," Ben said. "I wanted you to hear what they're saying." Ben activated a recording device. Jake heard the voice of Commander Susan Lewis, who had been captured 3 weeks earlier and returned just yesterday. "The Zephyrians treated us incredibly well," Susan's voice said. "Better than we probably deserved, considering how primitive our fighting methods are compared to theirs. They have such advanced technology, such sophisticated culture. I almost felt embarrassed to be fighting against them." Ben stopped the recording. She's not the only one talking like this. Almost every returned prisoner expresses similar feelings. Respect for Zephyrian superiority, embarrassment about human military capabilities, and gratitude for being treated so well despite being the enemy. Jake felt that familiar, uncomfortable feeling in his stomach. "That doesn't sound right." "It gets worse," Ben continued. He played another recording, this one from a group interview with returned prisoners. "Maybe we're fighting the wrong side," one voice said. "The Zephyrians have brought peace to dozens of star systems. They've created a galactic civilization based on honor and cooperation. What have we humans achieved in comparison? They could have destroyed our fleet on the first day if they wanted to," another voice added. "Instead, they're giving us a fair chance to prove ourselves." "That shows incredible nobility." Ben turned off the recording. "This is psychological conditioning, Jake. The Zephyrians aren't just winning battles, they're winning hearts and minds. They're making our own people believe that losing to them would be a good thing." Jake walked to his window and looked out at the stars. "How are they doing it?" "I think it's the civilized war itself," Ben explained. "Everything about it is designed to make the Zephyrians look superior. They follow the rules perfectly while we struggle to keep up. They show mercy when they could show strength. They treat prisoners better than we treat our own crew members. After months of this, it's natural for people to start thinking they must be better than us." Jake turned back to face Ben. "What about Earth? How are people back home reacting?" Ben's expression became even more troubled. "That's why I'm here. Admiral Hawkins is starting to talk about the honor of fighting such a worthy opponent. General Patricia Murphy said in a recent interview that losing to the Zephyrians might teach humanity valuable lessons about civilization. They're giving up before the war is even over? Not giving up exactly. But they're already talking about the benefits of defeat. They're saying that even if we lose, we'll gain something valuable from the experience." Jake sat down heavily in his chair. This was exactly what had happened to every other species that fought a civilized war with the Zephyrians. They started by respecting their enemies, then admiring them, then believing that losing to them was actually a privilege. "I need to understand what really happened to those other species," Jake said. "The ones who fought civilized wars with the Zephyrians in the past." Ben nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been working with Intelligence Officer Alex Turner to investigate Zephyrian history. We found some disturbing information." Ben showed Jake a series of reports on his tablet. "Look at this species, the Kethran Empire. They fought a civilized war with the Zephyrians 200 years ago. Before the war, they were a proud, independent civilization with advanced technology and rich culture. The reports showed images of beautiful Kethran cities and impressive military forces. Jake could see that they had been a powerful and sophisticated people. Now look at them today," Ben continued, showing new images. Jake stared in shock. The current Kethran territories looked completely different. Their cities had been rebuilt in Zephyrian style. Their ships used Zephyrian designs. Even their clothing and art had changed to match Zephyrian aesthetics. "They're not slaves," Ben explained. "They serve the Zephyrians willingly. They consider it an honor. They've completely abandoned their own culture and adopted Zephyrian ways instead." Jake looked at more reports showing other species. The pattern was always the same. Proud, independent civilizations that became devoted servants of the Zephyrians after losing civilized wars. This is what they want to do to humanity, Jake realized. They don't want to conquer us through force. They want us to surrender our identity willingly. And it's working, Ben said grimly. The psychological pressure is incredible. They're showing us that they're superior in every way that matters. Technology, tactics, culture, honor. After months of being outclassed by them, it's becoming harder and harder for humans to believe we deserve to win. Jake stood up and began pacing. There has to be a way to fight this. We can't let them turn humanity into another servant species. The problem is that everything they're doing is genuinely admirable, Ben explained. They really are more advanced than us. They really do follow higher moral standards in warfare. They really do treat prisoners better than we do. How do you fight against someone who actually is better than you in most ways? Jake thought about this question for a long time. The Zephyrians had created a perfect trap. They were using humanity's own values against them. Honor, fairness, respect for prisoners, following rules of war. These were things that humans believed in. The Zephyrians were simply better at these things than humans were. Maybe that's the answer, Jake said slowly. What do you mean? Maybe we can't beat them at being civilized. Maybe we need to stop trying to be civilized at all. Ben looked shocked. You're talking about breaking the rules of the civilized war? I'm talking about refusing to play by rules that are designed to make us lose, Jake replied. Every species that fights a civilized war against the Zephyrians ends up the same way. Maybe the only way to win is to not fight a civilized war at all. Ben shook his head. Earth Command would never approve that. They're already talking about the honor of following the rules even in defeat. Jake looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, the Zephyrian fleet was preparing for tomorrow's engagement. They would arrive on time, follow all the rules, fight with perfect honor, and probably win another victory. And with each victory, more humans would become convinced that the Zephyrians deserved to rule over them. Then maybe it's time someone stopped asking Earth Command for permission, Jake said quietly. Jake made his decision during the night shift when most of his crew was sleeping. He called Lieutenant Alex Turner to his quarters and explained what he wanted to do. You want to break the rules? Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to find out what we're really fighting, Jake replied. The Zephyrians have been controlling every aspect of this war. They decide where we fight, when we fight, and how we fight. I think it's time we learned what they don't want us to see. Alex was quiet for a long moment. If we get caught, they'll court-martial us. If we don't do this, there might not be a human military left to court-martial anyone, Jake said. Look at what's happening to our people. Every day, more of them start talking like the Zephyrians are superior. Even our own leaders are preparing for defeat. Jake had been monitoring communications from Earth. The reports were getting worse every day. Politicians were giving speeches about the valuable lessons humanity would learn from losing to such an advanced civilization. Military leaders were praising Zephyrian honor and suggesting that humans had much to learn from their enemies. What exactly do you want to do? Alex asked. I want to take a small ship deep into Zephyrian space. I want to see their home systems and find out what happened to all those other species that lost civilized wars. Alex nodded slowly. The communications blackout for tomorrow's battle would give us cover. We could take a stealth scout ship and be back before anyone noticed we were gone. Exactly. But Alex, if you come with me, you're risking your career and possibly your life. I won't order you to do this. Alex smiled grimly. Captain, I've been watching our people come back from Zephyrian prison ships talking like they want to surrender. Someone needs to find out what's really happening. 2 hours later, Jake and Alex were aboard the scout ship Whisper, moving silently through space toward the Zephyrian home system. The ship was designed for reconnaissance and was nearly invisible to most sensors. If they were careful, they could observe Zephyrian territory without being detected. The journey took 18 hours. As they approached the Zephyrian core worlds, Jake expected to see impressive cities and advanced technology. What he found was far worse than anything he had imagined. Captain, you need to see this, Alex said, his voice shaking. The main display showed a planet that had once been covered with magnificent cities. Jake could see the remains of original architecture, beautiful spires and flowing buildings that spoke of an advanced and artistic civilization. But those original structures were being systematically torn down and replaced with identical Zephyrian buildings. Those aren't Zephyrians doing the construction work, Alex observed. Jake looked closer. The beings working on the planet's surface were clearly not Zephyrian. They were shorter, with different skin color and body structure, but they were dressed in Zephyrian clothing and following Zephyrian architectural plans perfectly. Scan for life signs, Jake ordered. I want to know how many different species are down there. The results made Jake's blood run cold. The planet was inhabited by representatives of at least 12 different species, all of them working together on various projects. None of them were working on anything related to their own original cultures. "Let's check another planet," Jake said. They found the same pattern on world after world. Entire civilizations had abandoned their own ways of life and were now living as perfect copies of Zephyrian society. They had given up their own architecture, their own art, their own technology, and their own cultures. "It's not slavery," Alex said in amazement. "They're doing this voluntarily." Jake watched a group of aliens working to demolish what looked like a monument to their own history. They were smiling as they worked, apparently happy to be destroying reminders of their pre-Zephyrian past. "Take us to that research station," Jake said, pointing to a large facility on the planet's surface. They landed the Whisper in a remote area and used stealth suits to approach the facility on foot. Through the windows, they could see aliens from many different species working alongside Zephyrians on various scientific projects. Jake activated his recording device and began documenting what they saw. The aliens weren't just following Zephyrian orders. They were enthusiastically contributing their own ideas and expertise to Zephyrian projects. They seemed genuinely excited to be part of Zephyrian civilization. "Look at their faces," Alex whispered. "They're happy. Really, genuinely happy. That was what made it so horrible. These beings weren't suffering under Zephyrian rule. They loved it. They had been so thoroughly convinced of Zephyrian superiority that they considered their own cultures to be embarrassing mistakes from their primitive past." Jake recorded conversations between the workers. The aliens spoke about their homeworlds with shame and regret. They talked about how foolish they had been to resist Zephyrian civilization. They expressed gratitude for being allowed to serve such an advanced and honorable people. "We used to think our music was beautiful," one alien was saying to another. "Now I understand how crude and simple it was compared to Zephyrian compositions. I'm embarrassed that I ever enjoyed such primitive sounds." "I know what you mean," replied another. "I look at images of our old cities and I can't believe we thought they were impressive. They're so ugly compared to proper Zephyrian architecture." Jake and Alex spent hours documenting similar conversations. Every species represented on the planet had the same attitude. They had all concluded that their original cultures were inferior, and that adopting Zephyrian ways was the greatest achievement of their civilizations. "Captain, there's something else," Alex said. He had been monitoring communications between the research facility and other Zephyrian worlds. "They're already making plans for humanity." Jake looked at the intercepted messages. The Zephyrians were discussing Earth's eventual integration into their empire. They had detailed plans for replacing human architecture, modifying human education systems, and gradually introducing Zephyrian cultural values to human society. "They're not planning to occupy Earth by force," Jake realized. "They're planning to wait until we ask them to help us become more civilized." The messages made it clear that this was the standard process. After losing a civilized war, the defeated species would go through a period of self-doubt and cultural questioning. Zephyrian advisors would offer helpful suggestions for improvement. Gradually, the defeated people would adopt more and more Zephyrian practices until their original culture was completely replaced. "And they're always grateful for it," Alex said, reading more of the communications. "Every species thanks them for showing them a better way to live." Jake felt sick as he understood the full scope of what they were seeing. The Zephyrians had perfected a form of conquest that made the conquered people want to be conquered. They didn't need armies or threats. They simply had to demonstrate their superiority until their enemies surrendered their own identities willingly. "We need to get back," Jake said. "Earth has to know about this." But as they returned to their ship, Jake wondered if it would make any difference. The psychological conditioning was already working on humanity. People were already starting to admire Zephyrian culture and question human values. Even if he showed them proof of what happened to other species, would they care? Or would they see it as evidence that the Zephyrians offered a better way of life? During the long journey back to the war zone, Jake and Alex reviewed their recordings again and again. The evidence was overwhelming. The civilized war was not about settling territorial disputes. It was about breaking the spirit of entire civilizations and making them want to become servants of the Zephyrian Empire. "What are we going to do?" Alex asked as they approached human space. Jake looked at the images of happy, grateful aliens who had given up everything that made them unique. "We're going to fight back," he said, "but not the way they expect us to." Jake returned to the fleet to find that everything had gotten worse. During his unauthorized absence, humanity had lost 3 more major battles. Worse, the reports from Earth showed that human leaders were already discussing surrender terms with enthusiasm. They're calling it an honorable defeat, Major Ellen Foster told Jake when he arrived back at the Resilient. Admiral Hawkins gave a speech yesterday about how losing to the Zephyrians would teach humanity valuable lessons about true civilization. Jake called an emergency meeting with the few officers he trusted completely. Besides Ellen and Alex, he included Colonel Tony Martinez from the Marine Division and Communications Officer Danny Price. These were people who had expressed doubts about the Civilized War from the beginning. "Need to show you something," Jake said, activating the recordings he had made in Zephyrian space. For the next hour, the group watched in horror as Jake showed them world after world of former civilizations that had voluntarily abandoned their identities to become Zephyrian servants. "This is what they want to do to us," Jake explained. "The Civilized War isn't about winning or losing territory. It's about breaking our will to remain human." Tony stared at the images of alien species happily destroying their own historical monuments. "How do we fight something like this?" "We stop fighting their kind of war," Jake replied. "We stop being civilized." Ellen shook her head. "Earth Command will never approve that. They're already talking about the honor of following the rules even in defeat." "Then we don't ask for approval," Jake said. "We do what needs to be done to save humanity." Danny looked troubled. "You're talking about mutiny." "I'm talking about survival," Jake corrected. "Look at those recordings again. Every species that fought a civilized war with the Zephyrians ended up the same way. Every single one. The only way to break the pattern is to refuse to play by their rules." Over the next week, Jake quietly recruited others who shared his concerns. Many of the enlisted personnel had noticed the changes in human leadership and were disturbed by the growing admiration for Zephyrian culture. They were willing to follow Jake if he could offer an alternative to eventual surrender. The plan Jake developed was simple and brutal. Instead of meeting the Zephyrians for another polite, rule-following battle, the human fleet would launch a surprise attack, using every dirty tactic they could think of. They would ignore all the civilized war protocols and fight like cornered animals. "This will destroy our reputation," Ellen warned. "The galaxy will see us as barbarians." "Better to be free barbarians than willing slaves," Jake replied. The attack began at dawn on a Tuesday. The Zephyrian fleet was waiting in the designated battle zone, expecting another civilized engagement. Instead, they found human ships emerging from hyperspace at point-blank range, weapons already firing. Jake's ship, the Resilient, rammed directly into a Zephyrian cruiser before the aliens could raise their shields. The impact destroyed both vessels, but Jake and his crew had already evacuated in escape pods that immediately began attacking nearby enemy ships. Across the battle zone, human vessels abandoned every rule of civilized warfare. They targeted Zephyrian command ships first, ignoring military protocol. They used kamikaze attacks when conventional weapons failed. They showed no mercy to disabled enemy vessels and took no prisoners. "Incoming transmission from the Zephyrian flagship," Danny reported from his escape pod, which had managed to maintain communication with the scattered human forces. "Put it through," Jake ordered. Admiral Nexara Vell appeared on the small screen, her face showing shock and confusion. "Captain Morrison, what are you doing?" "This violates every agreement we made. This is not civilized warfare." "You're right," Jake replied. "This isn't civilized at all. This is how humans really fight when we're fighting for our survival." "But the rules," the Zephyrian admiral began. "Your rules were designed to make us lose," Jake interrupted. "We've seen what happens to species that follow your rules. We've seen your homeworlds, Admiral. We know what you really want." For the first time since the war began, Jake saw genuine emotion on a Zephyrian face. Admiral Nexaravel looked surprised, then angry, then something that might have been fear. "You don't understand," she said. "Civilized war is the only way to prevent massive destruction. Without rules, without limits, without rules, we might actually win," Jake finished. "And that's what you're really afraid of." The battle continued for 6 hours. The humans fought with desperate fury, using tactics that horrified their enemies. They rammed ships into space stations, fired on evacuation vessels, and ignored every convention of honorable warfare that the Zephyrians held sacred. The Zephyrians, trained only in civilized combat, were unprepared for such brutal tactics. Their superior technology was designed for elegant duels, not savage brawls. Their crews were psychologically unable to respond in kind to human barbarism. By the end of the day, the Zephyrian fleet was retreating. Not because they had been militarily defeated, they still had superior numbers and technology. They were retreating because they could not comprehend fighting an enemy that refused to follow any rules. Incoming message from Zephyrian High Command, Danny reported. This time it was not Admiral Nixaravel, but Supreme Commander Cathara Nix, the highest-ranking Zephyrian in the galaxy. His face showed disgust and revulsion. "Humans," he said, speaking the word like it tasted bad, "you have shown your true nature today. You are not a civilized species. You are barbarians who cannot appreciate the beauty of honorable warfare." "You're absolutely right," Jake replied. "We are barbarians, and we're proud of it." "The Zephyrian Collective withdraws its offer of civilized war," Commander Nix announced. "We will not soil ourselves by fighting creatures who have no understanding of honor or civilization." "Good," Jake said. "Maybe now you'll leave us alone." "The galaxy will know what you are," Commander Nix warned. "No civilized species will want to associate with humans after this display of savagery." "Then we'll find our own way," Jake replied. "We'd rather be alone and free than civilized and enslaved." The transmission ended, and Jake never heard from the Zephyrians again. Their fleet left the Kepler 442 system and never returned to human space. In the weeks that followed, Jake faced a court-martial for violating the rules of civilized warfare. But something had changed in human leadership. The spell of Zephyrian psychological conditioning had been broken by the brutal reality of what those rules really meant. Admiral Hawkins, who had once praised Zephyrian honor, now spoke differently. "Captain Morrison showed us that some things are more important than appearing civilized," he said during the hearing. "Freedom is one of those things." Jake was cleared of all charges and promoted to admiral. His final report on the Zephyrian War became required reading at every military academy in human space. Years later, Jake would receive messages from other species in the galaxy. Most condemned humanity for its barbaric behavior during the war. But a few, species that had heard about the human victory, sent secret communications asking for advice on how to resist Zephyrian civilization. Jake always gave the same answer. Sometimes the only way to fight a civilized war is to refuse to be civilized. Sitting in his office on Earth, Jake looked up at the stars and thought about the choice humanity had made. The galaxy might see them as savages, but they were free savages. They had kept their identity, their culture, and their independence. They had learned that being called uncivilized was a small price to pay for remaining human. In his final log entry as commander of humanity's defense forces, Jake wrote, "They called it a civilized war, but what I saw was horror. Not the horror of violence and death. We humans have always known that horror. The real horror was the slow, gentle murder of the soul. They wanted to make us grateful for our own defeat. Instead, we reminded them why some wars should never be civilized." The log entry ended with a simple statement that became humanity's unofficial motto in their dealings with other galactic civilizations. "We would rather be free barbarians than willing slaves." And in the depths of space, the Zephyrian Empire continued its slow, patient conquest of the galaxy, adding species after species to their collection of grateful servants. But they gave human space a wide berth, unwilling to deal with a people who had proven that civilization could be rejected in favor of something the Zephyrians could never understand: the stubborn, violent, beautiful refusal to surrender.